security. So why we are thinking about Ukrainian economy now when the wild stage of war is going on? First of all, it's important to have a short-term, middle-term, and long-term vision. How the economy will be, first of all, handled at this moment, and secondly, how it would be rebuilt about when the war will end. And I truly believe in Ukrainian victory, and this time will come sooner than later. First of all, if you are talking about far-reaching plans, long-term perspective, we need to give these people who are fighting in the front, we need to give them vision. What would be Ukraine after war ended? It could be good, it could be different scenario, and it's in our hand to design and redesign economy from the scratch. So the big idea is to create new type of economy, to rebuild Ukraine in sustainable way, to redesign old-fashioned energy system and turn to a more greener, cleaner, and more sustainable energy system inside Ukraine, to secure, to expand infrastructure, and also to make it much more efficient. So first of all, our vision is to make it much more efficient, much more productive, and greener. In middle-term perspective, we also need to think about all these displaced people who lose their job, how they will be employed, how to help them to find their working place inside and outside Ukraine. And immediate needs, which is now also huge because the economy is going through the very big hardship. We also need to win this war. We need to stand strong, and for this is also need the support and somehow thinking and vision how to make this economy running. At this point, I'll give the floor to Minister of Finance, Serhiy Marchenko, and to continue on immediate needs, which is quite important, and to continue this discussion. And to Josh Lipsky, who will be moderating this discussion as well.
Natalia, thank you for that very important opening that set the framework for this. And Minister Marchenko, thank you for being with us today. We know how precious your time is, and it's truly appreciated from all of us at the Atlantic Council. I run the Geoeconomics Center on behalf of the Eurasia Center as well, my colleagues, Ambassador John Herbst and Melinda Herring. I want to jump right in. We have a lot of questions to get to. I want the audience to ask questions as well, so please submit in the Q&A function for those of you on the Zoom. But let's start pre-invasion, because it's so easy to overlook this in the current crisis. Could you tell us a little bit about the state of the Ukrainian economy before the invasion from January?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be with you to talk about our pre-time economic conditions, our wartime economic conditions, and how come we can deal with the post-war period. So let's start from where we was before the war. First and most important thing I want to tell you that it should have been 2022 should be a year of success build-up of Ukraine. So our basis for this year was very strong, and I think that this year was very flexible in public finance sphere, in other economic sphere, so we can manage to deal with all challenges. We get accustomed to how to deal with COVID crisis. I think that Ukraine was only one economy in emerging markets economy which can decrease the level of debt to GDP ratio in COVID period. So also this level was only 49%, and our deficit in 2021 was 3.8%, and planned deficit was 5.5. So we decreased the amount of money which we needed to borrow very drastically. And again, in 2022 we plan a deficit level at 3.5% of GDP. So it was also very low in comparison with other countries. And despite all the problems, despite all of the challenges, I think this year should have been different for us, and our international reserves was very huge, 31 billion US dollars, and it was so in January when in January we had GDP growth more than 7%. So I believe that it will be not so dynamic to the whole year, but again, we expected the level of GDP growth more than 4% for 2022. But it was dreams, because now we see that Ukraine is today is 3 months of war, and we realize that we live in far different countries than we expected. Our economic situation is far different. We see the drastic GDP decline. We see that our revenues also dropped very in very huge amount. For example, we lost 70% of our pre-war revenues from customs. Our revenues from state administrations, we can manage to only 70%. But now our key focus is how to make our government functional, to stay paying pensions, to stay paying salaries, social protections payments, salaries for healthcare workers, educational needs, facilities, etc. So, and we managed to do so despite all the war crisis. Starting from the first days of war, we relocated our critical infrastructure in a very safe place, and we managed to provide all payments of our treasuries since the first day of war. Our banking system is well functioning as well. So I think that it's something we can be proud of. But again, it's not just we should be proud, it's our people who received necessary payments and who can get some money to be able to live in these very critical conditions. So I think it's was to finish for this starting points. Let's start from the questions, and I am ready to answer it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for where it's telling us where the Ukrainian economy came from, which helps us measure the extent of what needs to be done. I want to start out where you ended here on the reserves and the payments. We understand that there's probably a 5 billion deficit monthly. What what you have in hand right now, how are you able to sustain current payments going out? What is the gap that needs to be filled in the immediate sense?
The gap we had right now, which very closely, which were very closely analyzed by our key partners from IMF, from World Bank, is around $5 billion per month. It's figures which very all world is trusted. So I think that other countries also believe that this figures is right and very correct. This figure includes all necessary payments which we should pay for our humanitarian and social needs. So it's just gap we should finance except of military one. So for this basis we provide necessary negotiations with our partners, and now we are trying to fill this top up this amount with all possible partners and donors. What we see right now is that, for example, in May, we haven't got all this amount. Now, for this particular moment, we received only 1.2 billion US dollars in our account, and till the end of till the end of this month, we expected receive up to 2 billion, but not 5. So, and it makes us to do some very drastic decision for our economy. we try to wisely manage our cash liquidity balance. So made some postponement of payments. We do some other steps to prevent deficit, to prevent making problems with payments. But again, we can manage to borrow internally through war bonds. And every month we can borrow up to $1 billion as a war bonds. Also, at this moment of our history, our central bank, National Bank of Ukraine, is eager to support government, and it's totally agreed with our partners from IMF, from World Bank. They also agreed that at this particular moment, National Bank can be last resort for a government. We don't want to use it as a key tools to finance our deficit, but as we see some liquidity problems in our treasury accounts, we come to National Bank of Ukraine and ask them to help us. But again, the key and most important things which we try to base on is our donors and idea to safeguard necessary amount of money on from our key partners is our most important goal in this particular moment. 90% of my time I'm spending on negotiations with different G7 ministers of finance, IMF, World Bank, EBRD, EAB. So it's far different situation when it was before the war.
On the G7 that you mentioned, we saw the commitment last week of $20 billion, but as you mentioned here, there's a gap between that commitment and the money actually coming into your accounts. So you referenced this in what you just said, but how close are you in terms of needing monetary financing, printing of money, and going to the central bank? How do you make that decision, and where's the threshold in your mind of when to make that request of the central bank?
We agreed that we can borrow from central bank the amount no bigger than $1.5 billion per month. So, and we make this limit, and we moved in this direction despite all of these problems. We try to be reliable partners with National Bank of Ukraine because we see that it could be not just their problems. If we created hyperinflation loop, it could be problems from the government, which we find a way how to solve. So now we see that the money which we receive from National Bank of Ukraine, National Bank of Ukraine can use through deposit certificates, so they can absorb this amount, and this money doesn't pressure consumption, so they just deposit it in banking accounts and then transfer to the accounts of National Bank of Ukraine. But again, the situation can change very quickly in the period of 3 months. So when people realize that they can spend this money, it's a question that it's a question of time when this money can do inflation bigger and make us other problems which we should find how to solve.
And the gap is enormous. Natalia said this in the beginning, estimate $600 billion so far, economic losses. We saw President Zelensky yesterday in video in Davos calling for a new Marshall Plan, which he has said before. And I wonder if you could explain that to us a little. You know, when we think back of the Marshall Plan, it was of course loans and grants, but primarily grants, if you look at the proportion of it, not loans. So I wonder how you think about that as you're negotiating with, say, the IMF and conditionality. Is this something you are asking for from the international community that should be in the form of grants, or is it a mix of grants and loans?
You know, I am. What I want to tell you is that it's not my headache right now how we can find money to rebuild our economy. My headache right now how we can find money to just to be alive in the war conditions. That's why I don't know how we can find the right sources for rebuilding. It's not my key points which I should have a close look, because my idea is to find money right now for the 3 months period to the end of the year, and then if we find right condition, we can discuss what could be this condition for a government, what we should do, what should be, because the idea of Marshall Plan for Ukraine is far different from different stakeholders. There are several stakeholders within Ukraine who are discussing Marshall Plan. Of course, President Zelensky is leading this group of people. We see that European Commission provided their views on how Marshall Plan have looked for Ukraine. Also, we see that it's possible for the United States to be involved, Canada wants to be involved, United Kingdom wants to be involved. Again and again, a lot of people wants to support us. And my question as a Minister of Finance is very simple. What could be sources of this? Or it could be grant financing or credit financing. It's a question of sources. If we can receive candidacy status of candidate to the European Union, I believe we can find a source within European Union, because it could be some way which we can be possible to use structural funds of EU. Now it's one way. Another way, how we can seize Russia assets which now frozen. It could be another sources to finance our reconstruction needs, our Marshall Plan. But if you look at perspective to seize these assets, it takes some time to do this, because it's not just political decision from some governments to do so. We see that Canada, United Kingdom, the United States are eager to support us in this endeavor and to help us to use these frozen assets towards Ukraine, to rebuild Ukraine. But again, it takes a lot of time to final point to receive this money. Yeah. So I am not just I'm not so optimistic as other people who believe that we should rebuild Ukraine as fast as we can. I very pessimistic in this endeavor, because we should win this war first, and then we can start the process of rebuilding. But we can start process of discussion how to rebuild Ukraine, conditionalities. We can start to understand what we should do within Ukraine, how to attract foreign direct investment within Ukraine, because it's not just donors and credits money. I believe that the only way to have another economy is to create necessary conditions which can attract foreign direct investment within Ukraine. And then we can understand that it could be some way on judicial reform, anti-corruption reform, and then. So the money and sources how to finance Ukraine's reconstruction, it's not first maybe question which we should discuss, because again, now we see that it's quite natural to finance our current needs and find the ways how to cover our deficit. And then after we will win this war, because I believe there is no other ways, we can discuss sources how to finance rebuilding of Ukraine. This is my answer.
No, thank you for that. So let me just ask you a blunt question, and then I have one more, and then I'm going to turn to my colleagues. But based on what you said, and you're speaking, here to our audience in Washington, around the world, are you getting enough immediate support, separate from the rebuilding, as you outlined? Are you getting enough immediate financial support from Washington, from the G7, from the international financial institutions, or can more be done?
We agreed on the amount of money which we needed, $5 billion per month. And now what we see, that the United States passed the legislation which and President Joe Biden signed it, which opens a way how Ukraine can receive 7.5 billion US dollar as grant financing. Also, we received very clear signal from the European Union that Ukraine can receive 9 billion euro as a macro financial assistance. It could be credits, but again, it's very nice credit for Ukraine, because we need to return, but the question is very low interest rate and high level of maturity. So except of that, we see possible to receive additional finances from Japan. Japan agreed us to add 500 million US dollars more. We already received 100 million from Japan. Again, it could be grant financing from Germany. Minister of Finance of Germany, Christian Lindner, pledged that can provide us 1 billion euro as a grant financing from Germany. Also, we believe in trust fund of World Bank. They already have there more than 1.5 billion US dollar as credit for Ukraine. Also, another instrument which is strongly believe it could possibly be part of sources to rebuild Ukraine. I want to stress it out. It's SDR allocation to help Ukraine, and we see that IMF thanks them together with Canada Minister of Finance Chrystia Freeland created administrative account, and the part of SDRs which other country can provide Ukraine can be shared through this account, and this money, the amount of this money can be very huge.
Yeah.
And if we ask them just to share part of this money reallocated in 2021, and I think that even 10% or 20%, Kristalina Georgieva in G7 meeting ministers of finance mentioned that they can share even 20% of this SDR towards Ukraine, can help us. But again, it's a question of time. As I correctly asked me how much money we are receiving yet, I can tell you it's just around 6 billion US dollars for 3 months.
So there's a gap. There's a gap that needs to be made up.
Yeah.
And no, that's an important reminder for us. We'll share here with the group what we've done on the special drawing rights of the IMF. And as we all know, that can take time, and we have to cut through the red tape, given the gap you've just outlined for us. One more question from me. You have a unique perspective on the Russian economy, sitting where you sit. How do you assess the impact of the sanctions so far on the Russian economy? What more would you like to see done? We hear from the EU now the oil embargo may come into effect or be announced at least in the coming days.
Okay, I am very straightforward person. I can tell you that we see that despite all of the sanctions Russia, which were imposed on Russia, the effect is, I don't want to tell positive. It's very slightly negative, because what we see right now is that Russia receives every day 1 billion euro because of a huge price on oil and gas. They have deficit in their budget, so they can spend much more money on their wartime, war machine. They can make it easier for them to do the war with Ukraine. Also, a lot of other factors. Their exchange rate, everybody expected that there should be a drop of ruble because of sanctions. Now it's not. Moreover, ruble is is appreciated in comparison with pre-war time. Even they even lifted some restrictions on currency control. So okay, we can estimate that they can do a great job to support the economy. But from me, Minister of Finance of Ukraine, which are suffering every day, in our territory we see a lot of damages. We see they killed our people, they destroyed our critical infrastructure, they destroyed our economy. Our everyday losses is around 300 million euro per day. And when we see that the sanctions haven't been working, we ask to do more, because I think that it could be another front of possible support of Ukraine. We need more sanctions on. You mentioned oil and gas embargo. Yes, it should be total oil and gas embargo, but because when we just talking about this, it only makes price on oil stable and prices just raises because of these buzzes about possibility of embargo. But when we see embargo, okay, it can make damage for Russian economy. Another part of sanctions which can help us sanction all increase the list of banks which can be sanctions, because now we see that the only minor quantity of banks now under sanctions. So we believe that we can increase this amount. Another question that we can move towards secondary sanctions on other countries which can or could help Russia to avoid sanctions, to bypass sanctions. So again and again, sanctions should be very critically analyzed, and in a way how they can make Russia suffer. And of course, if you look at perspective, sanctions can work and can make Russia economy some damages, provide some damages for Russia economy. But for this particular moment, which time is very important for us, very important is time. We can't wait until the next year when we see how sanctions can make some problems for Russia Ministry of Economy or Ministry of Finance. We see that now they can do what they want. And it's another question which we are discussing with our international partners. We ask them to do more sanctions.
So let me now turn to Melinda Herring, Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center. Melinda, over to you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Mr. Minister. I have two questions for you on reconstruction. So the first question is that the Ukrainian government has set up a centralized reconstruction account. And I think a lot of us are wondering why you guys did that. Why should other governments trust Kiev to oversee this enormous task, given that you have an ongoing war? And the scope of the task and the country's, I'd say, lackluster record with state corruption. So that's question one. And then a more philosophical question for you. You and your government are going to face a lot of dilemmas in the reconstruction work. Are you planning on rebuilding what was lost, or are you planning on bringing things up to a higher standard? So for instance, on energy, will you just rebuild old Soviet buildings to the old standard, or will you bring them up to green energy standards? Thank you.
It's a good questions. I am not a person who is in charge of reconstruction of this country, but I really understand how the real cost of reconstruction and how it will cost. And if you ask me in 2021 how we can manage to collect necessary amount for money for reconstruction, I have an idea how to answer your question, because this money we collected from our taxes, and despite all of the problems you mentioned, despite of the corruption and other questions which we had, despite all of the reforms, it's still I think the major bottlenecks of Ukraine, that we are not able to show that other country or other investors should trust us. Despite all of this, it was money of taxpayers of Ukrainian people, so we can manage to make expenses or expenditures in a way what country needed to do. It could be road construction, it would be critical infrastructure, rebuilding, etc. But now in 2022, it's not the same, because we in a war period, we are under martial law, so our budget is very compressed. We just paying pensions, salaries, other protections expenses, and war salaries for our troops, for our army. And it means that it's only minor amount of money we spend to relieve or rebuild our critical infrastructure. From 3 months period, we just spent no much than 1.5 billion hryvnias on some constructions to help to create some temporary bridges, etc. And I think that your question is about future. And again, if you discussing about future, we should realize what could be the sources to finance rebuilding of Ukraine. And I think that if we rely on international partners and some part of donors financing this rebuilding, it should be very trustful and mutual agreement on how and in what ways we can spend this money. Because I think that it's not just our taxpayers' money, it's taxpayers' money of taxpayers of other countries. And these countries can ask us to create a very transparent mechanism on how we should use it, in what ways, what goals. And when you're asking about just rebuilding apartments in a Soviet manner, I don't think it's a wise idea to do so. We should try to create new environment, an energy efficient environment. Now we're in a petrol crisis, and we believe that it could be prolonged longer than we expected before. And now it's the question that we should create enough space for electromobiles, buildings within Ukraine. So it's a lot of questions to discuss. But what I want to, what we want to make a stress on, what questions bother me the most, that we can rebuild our country when we see trust among partners. When we create enough space for trust, when we provide necessary reforms, very crucial necessary reforms, judicial reforms, anti-corruption reform, to get installed all necessary institutions to control how we can spend this money. So it will be the way which help us to prevent questions like that. Because I think it's all people of Ukraine are interested to close this book of 30 years book of our failed state endeavor. Because I can tell you that we're struggling a lot, and a lot of people now asking, why we believe you, why you're thinking that you will be not the same after the war. I think that the war gave us good chance to forget about our disease, which we have in the previous period of time. But again, chance, what we have is a chance, but the chance doesn't mean that we will use it. So let's create necessary conditions that we will use this chance. This is my answer on your question.
Thank you. And I know we have just about 10 minutes left, so we want to get through a lot of questions we have from the audience. First, let me turn Charles Litchfield, Deputy Director at the Geoeconomic Center. Charles.
Honorable Minister, I have a very quick question on your relationship with the EU. I realize that you want to talk about the immediate future. And so instead of asking about long-term membership prospects, I was interested in whether you think the EU could do more to improve Ukraine's access to EU markets so that the Ukrainian economy, which I understand is operating at a very constrained level, could perhaps do slightly better. Are there negotiations going on with the EU on market access? And then in the long term, what would be your hope for the Ukraine's membership prospects? There's obviously the debate about being offered a sort of anti-chamber membership by France. That's been criticized in Washington and in other parts of the EU. So I was wondering what your reaction was. Thank you.
You know, we believe in our European perspective, and we are paying very huge price for this perspective. Every day, losses of our civilians and our army is proved that our goal to be part of great Europe is not just desire. It's our struggle to achieve it. And that's why I am not even thinking that we can some part it could be some kind of dispute on that way. We're expecting that other countries can estimate our efforts, because again, we are talking about one of the biggest war in this part of the world after the Second World War. We are talking about that we are struggling with the most powerful army in this continent. We are struggling for our independence. We are trying to achieve all possibles, to do all necessary to win this war. And that's why if we, after the war, will wait another 10 or 20 years to be part of Europe, it takes a lot of, it gets a lot of questions within Ukraine. Why it's so dishonest in context of just people of Ukraine? Because civilians are not understand when some politicians within Europe are talking of lasting perspective. If there is some condition, let's make this condition implemented within Ukraine, and then we can. It's our struggle. We are struggling to be part of Europe. You also mentioned about EU markets, a possibility to get access to the market. Now we see that Europe lifted all market quotas and duties which were related towards commodities from Ukraine. It's a one way how they can support Ukraine's economy, because it could be. We believe that we can be a part of single European markets and to be in a like free zone with Europe without any customs and duties. So we are also, it's a part of our struggle to be part of European market. So let's see how it will be. But again, we don't expect it could be in 10 or 20 years. We can do our homework very quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me turn to Andrew from the Eurasia Center. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Josh. Mr. Minister, very quickly from me, some experts are discussing ways to break Russia's Black Sea blockade. I wonder just how much would this help the Ukrainian economy to be able to ship in the Black Sea? How much would this help the Ukrainian economy tomorrow if we can make this happen?
You know that our Odessa harbor is the most important ways on for Ukraine to export our commodities throughout the world. And now what we see right now is that because of unprovoked Russia aggression and blockade of seaports of Ukraine, more than 10 million crops are stuck there. And I already talked that it's not just Ukrainian problem. It can be a problem from North and South Africa, from Egypt, from other countries which rely on our crops. But again, the ways how to solve this bottlenecks is now they discussing. There's some discussion on the ways how we can solve this problem. And you know that United Nations also are interested on the ways how to support Ukraine to get commodities delivered to their customers. Let's see how it will be, because now what we see is still the same problem as it was in March. So, and time is very important also for this endeavor, because we can expect in August, September, and October another harvest, and we should also find ways how to stock it and how to deliver it. So I believe that the way on how we should deblockade this road should be found sooner than later, because it's not just Ukrainian problem. It's I believe it's a problem for whole mankind.
Thank you.
We have some great audience questions here, and let me pull a couple of them together. One's on public debt. It may surprise people who aren't paying very close attention that Ukraine is, in a punctual way, in a timely way, servicing and paying all of its public debt, paying its bondholders. But given the financing gap we discussed, I wonder if you could talk about how you weigh that decision, and if you think about debt relief, debt renegotiation with creditors at this time.
It's a very sensitive question for us, because I have strong idea in my mind that you should be very strong and committed to fulfill all your obligations. It's my ministerial position and the position of our ministries. And despite all of the issues we have from beginning of the war, we was very committed to do all necessary payments to repay and to service our debt payments. But again, we see a lot of incentives around the world. We are not just want to be silent and just want to be earless. We understand that other donors push us to do some steps on a way how to make debt relief, debt restructurings. I'm not ready to tell that it's that we are not thinking about some ways, but we are not making any steps do this, because for this year we have very minor debt, foreign debt repayment, and only big amount we see in September, not $900 million US. So until September, we see it possible to do all necessary payments. And again, we are trying to find the ways how to make it possible to do payments even in September. Mm-hmm. So let's see how it will be, because for now we're talking about this in May, so we have June, July, and August to be ready to answer these questions, because I should change my previous mood. So because there are a lot of desire to help us, to make us debt relief program and other programs. We are not seeking for this debt relief program, because we want to be reliable partner. We want to be able to borrow in international capital markets. It's our key goal, a key understanding on how things going on. So that's why, if you are talking about any debt relief, debt restructuring, and something like that, let's Ukraine find the ways how to talk about it, because we don't want somebody to do it behind us, because it's our own interest to be part of international capital markets. It's our own interest to be very reliable partner, because we used to be so. So that's why it's very complicated question to answer it very strict directly.
Yeah.
Or yes or no.
Yeah.
So if we see it possible, we will look at perspective. Now we are able to provide all necessary payments.
I appreciate that. And I would hope all the external creditors and anyone listening in on this or watching after, I imagine they would have to be understanding given the circumstances, even as you think about future financing in the Ukrainian economy. And it's extraordinary that the Russian economy may be about to default on its bonds, but the Ukrainian economy, through your stewardship and the stewardship of the government, may continue to pay its bonds, whatever the trade-offs involved in that. I think that's an extraordinary dynamic to think about in the months ahead. I have a question here about cryptocurrency that's been talked about a lot. Cryptocurrencies as a means of funneling in humanitarian aid, given all the frictions in the current system. What do you see on the ground? Is that actually happening? Are digital currencies, either in public or private form, being used to help the humanitarian crisis?
I know that one of my colleagues, Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhail Fedorov, pushed this idea on a way that different donors can help Ukraine through cryptocurrency, and they created even some part of fund or some way how to use it. So, but I am not ready to tell that I am fully supportive of this idea. I believe that countries should deal directly with the countries, with international partners, because it's a very transparent way to receive money. It's a very transparent way which we can report on how we can collect and how we can spend this money. We can provide all necessary analysis and reports on all sense of grant finance, credit finance, which we receive through budget. But cryptocurrency is another way. Of course, different people can use this to support Ukraine, to support humanitarian needs, to support even our military conditions. But again, I am talking about here as a Minister of Finance of Ukraine. So we can't use cryptocurrency in our budget. So if somebody wants to support Ukraine through cryptocurrency, they can do it. But I am not responsible for that. I don't want to commit any responsibility for cryptocurrency which are flowing to different accounts towards Ukraine. So I am responsible only for budget money, for taxpayers' money, and for donors' money. I can stress it. I can tell how we can spend every cent of donor support money which we received from this moment of time.
Thank you. Minister, you've been extraordinarily generous with your time, and we know how busy you are. I just want to give you the floor for any final comments you want to make to this audience going forward, something to leave us with, and then I'll wrap and conclude.
Thank you very much for listening to me. I try to be very honest with you and try to explain where are we now and what our current needs, what our expectation about future, about rebuilding of our country. And again, I want to make it clear that I believe that the only way which can help Ukraine to become prosperous and stronger is you should be different in comparison with pre-war time. We should create different institutions. We should create different environment. We should find the ways how to convince other countries and other businesses to believe in Ukraine, to trust us. So, and I think that even during the war, we should talk about our Marshall Plan, thinking about ways how to convince private money invest in Ukraine. When we realize that foreign direct investors are seeking to invest in Ukraine because of there was some reasoning for that, because they can believe in Ukraine, it could be a right signal that we are moving in the right directions, that we have our own Marshall Plan, that we can attract as much money as needed to rebuild our country. So thank you very much, all listeners. Thank you very much again. I was happy to answer your question.
Well, thank you for your honesty and your time and dealing with all the range of questions. On behalf of the Geoeconomics Center and the Eurasia Center, we are honored to host you today. Your government and the Ukrainian people have inspired all of us. We want to continue to support in the ways we can, both financially and otherwise, and both in the immediate crisis, as you outlined, winning the war, and then the rebuilding effort. We will be here. Thank you, and thank you everyone for being with us. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.